If you dropped into the 1990s cold, heroin chic could look like a sudden rupture. A fashion industry that had spent the 1980s selling strength, polish, and excess suddenly filled magazine pages with pale faces, hollow eyes, slack posture, and bodies that looked worn down rather than sculpted. It felt new. It felt transgressive. It also came with a convenient story that this was a brief phase, a scandalous visual language that burned hot and then disappeared. That story still leaves too much out. The look did not appear from nowhere, and it did not vanish when the headlines cooled off. Long before Calvin Klein, Western culture had already learned how to turn female frailty into something desirable. Long after the 1990s, the same logic kept resurfacing under cleaner labels, softer filters, and newer products. The names shifted, the pattern held. Before this aesthetic had a label, beauty culture already knew how to stylize illness. In the late 18th and early 19th centuries, tuberculosis shaped a widely admired feminine ideal in Europe and North America. The disease was widespread and lethal. It moved through cities, poor households, and working communities with brutal force. Yet in upper-class culture, its visible symptoms were often recast as signs of refinement. Pale skin, weight loss, flushed cheeks, bright eyes, and physical fragility were treated as evidence of delicacy and sensitivity rather than as markers of a deadly infection. Romantic literature, painting, and theater helped fix that image in place. Ailing heroines appeared ethereal, tragic, elevated by suffering. Writers linked wasting illness to heightened feeling and artistic depth. Opera kept repeating the same picture. A woman with a cough on stage did not simply seem unwell. She seemed beautiful in a way ordinary health could not match. Women in good health then copied the appearance. Tight corsets forced the body into a narrow, fragile silhouette. Cosmetics lightened skin and sharpened facial contrast. Some beauty products contained belladonna, arsenic, mercury, ammonia, and opium. The goal was not vigor. The goal was the look of decline. That history established a rule that would survive for centuries. Female beauty could be tied to visible weakness. A diminished body could be framed as a superior body. Pain could be detached from the person living through it and turned into an image for others to admire. It also established a second rule that never went away. The romance depended on class. When tuberculosis affected privileged white women, culture called it delicate and poetic. When it tore through poor neighborhoods, factories, and overcrowded housing, it was treated as filth, danger, and public crisis. The same disease produced two meanings, and the difference rested on who was suffering in public. The older culture also developed a moral vocabulary around that visual ideal. A woman who looked faint, breathless, and breakable could be read as elevated. The body became a class signal long before fashion photography existed. Later trends could revive the look so quickly because the coding work had already been done. Aestheticized sickness also carried a gendered lesson. Women were praised for appearing delicate, passive, and physically reduced, while masculine health was far less likely to be idealized through visible decline. The admired sick body was not just thin, it was quiet. It signaled that a woman took up less space, asked for less, and could be read as spiritually heightened precisely because she looked physically weakened. That link between desirability and diminishment became one of the most durable features of modern beauty culture. It helps explain why later trends could swing between healthy and unhealthy surfaces while still rewarding control, smallness, and restraint. The styling changed. The demand for female self-reduction stayed recognizable. By the time fashion entered the early 1990s, that older logic was ready for revival. The 1980s had been defined by the supermodel: athletic, glossy, expensive, fully in command of the frame. By the early 1990s, that language looked overblown to a younger culture leaning toward grunge, underground music, diary-style photography, and a cultivated mistrust of polish. Fashion responded fast. It moved away from overt glamour and toward something flatter, thinner, and more drained. The look that followed was easy to identify: wayfish bodies, pale skin, dark circles, stringy hair, a vacant or detached expression. Clothes that looked slept in rather than styled. It suggested exhaustion, boredom, and a kind of expensive neglect. The point was not radiant health. The point was distance. The cultural fuel came from several places at once. Grunge pushed fashion away from hard glamour. Documentary and snapshot photography gave editors and advertisers a visual grammar that felt raw, intimate, and anti-commercial, even when it was being used to sell something. Fashion took those cues and translated them into a marketable style. That translation is where the story darkens. Nan Goldin's photographs of friends and lovers came out of actual relationships and actual risk. They documented lives shaped by addiction, sex, illness, grief, and intimacy. Fashion borrowed the visual texture of that work, then pulled it away from the reality that gave it weight. What remained was a saleable version of roughness. Private suffering became style. Corinne Day's images of young Kate Moss helped define that mood. So did Mario Sorrenti's work for Calvin Klein. The 1993 Obsession campaign became one of the decade's most influential image sets. It looked loose and unguarded. It sold that lack of guard as authenticity. There was a business reason for the shift as well. The supermodel era had grown expensive and familiar. The new look felt cheaper to produce and more current to sell. Less polish could be framed as honesty. Bare walls, dirty floors, motel rooms, smeared makeup, and undernourished silhouettes created the impression of access to something unscripted. That impression sold extremely well. Fashion did not step away from fantasy in the 1990s. It moved toward a different fantasy, one that preferred to look accidental. The new images often looked less lit, less posed, less corrected. Bedrooms replaced glossy sets. Smudged eyeliner replaced the lacquered finish of the previous decade. A photograph could suggest boredom, drift, aftermath. That feeling of aftermath did a great deal of commercial work. It implied access to a private life beyond the brand. Consumers were not only being sold clothes or fragrance, they were being sold proximity to a mood that appeared careless and intimate at the same time. Gia Karangi often gets pulled into this story as a kind of origin figure. She rose quickly in the late 1970s and early 1980s, working with major photographers and appearing in leading magazines. She later developed a serious drug addiction, had visible track marks in some published images, contracted HIV through shared needles, and died in 1986 at 26 from AIDS-related complications. The mythology around her drifted away from the record. In later conversations about the trend, Karangi was often treated as a prototype for the 1990s waif. Yet, people close to her pushed back on that framing. Makeup artist Sandy Linter said Gia was booked for her body and her curves, not for looking extremely thin or strung out. That distinction separates a real woman's collapse from the cleaner mythology fashion later attached to it. Her image also acquired a retrospective charge. The hardest years of her addiction were not met with a visible culture of protection inside fashion. Later, her image could be folded into a narrative about danger, glamour, and edge. A real decline could be reread as a style reference. Kate Moss occupied a different position. She was a teenager when she became the face most strongly tied to that look. Her early Calvin Klein and editorial work became central to the rise of that aesthetic. Public framing often treated her as though she had designed the look herself. She had not. Adults styled her, photographed her, cast her, approved the images, and turned them into campaigns. The face in the frame became the symbol. The machinery around the frame stayed less visible. That pattern runs through fashion history. A decade gets pinned to one model, one photographer, one campaign. The story becomes easier to tell and easier to contain. The larger structure that chose the look, distributed it, and profited from it slips into the background. Moss's later fame made that simplification even easier. Once she became globally recognizable, it became tempting to tell the decade's body politics through her alone. That made for clean media storytelling, but it blurred responsibility. A teenage model could be criticized for embodying an era while the editors, advertisers, photographers, and executives who chose that embodiment stayed off to the side. The 1990s did not simply flirt with drug imagery. It pushed that imagery into mainstream visual culture. Writers at the time described magazine spreads and ad campaigns filled with emaciated models in grim interiors. Eyes half closed, bodies arranged to suggest depletion. In May 1997, President Bill Clinton publicly attacked the trend, saying fashion images had made addiction seem glamorous, sexy, and cool, and adding that glamorizing addiction to sell clothes was destructive, not creative. That backlash grew out of what people could plainly see. The discomfort sharpened after the death of photographer Davide Sorrenti in 1997. Sorrenti was 20. His work sat close to the same mood that had been circulating through fashion editorials and campaigns. His death erased some of the distance between the image and the conditions around it. Ingrid Sishi's line, "This is heroin, this isn't chic," became the clearest summary of the moment. Even that reckoning had limits. And on whether magazines and advertisers were sending the wrong message. Less attention went to labor conditions inside modeling and fashion photography. Young models were still expected to maintain extreme thinness. Agencies still recruited very young talent. Support systems remained weak. A scandal over images did not automatically produce structural reform. The retreat after 1997 was more cosmetic than complete. The phrase "heroin chic" became more embarrassing to use in public. Late 1990s fashion began pivoting toward a sexier, more overtly healthy image, especially with the rise of models like Gisele Bündchen. The shift looked more like aesthetic adjustment than moral repair. Fashion did not reject thinness. It changed the styling around thinness. The hollow stare gave way to tanned skin, visible energy, and the language of vitality. The body underneath often remained just as restricted. That pattern keeps returning. A standard survives while its explanation changes. Yesterday, the body is desirable because it looks fragile. Today, the same scale of body is desirable because it looks disciplined. Tomorrow, it may be framed as clean, efficient, elite, or naturally small. The packaging updates faster than the demand. There was also a political convenience in attacking the image without touching the structure around it. Condemning a trend was easier than confronting the age of many working models, the pressure to stay extremely thin, or the broader advertising system that profited from instability and insecurity. Public outrage could gather around a label like this because it was easier to isolate than the system behind it. It could be blamed, denounced, then retired. A labor system was harder to stage manage. It did not disappear because a few editors changed tone or a few brands insisted the next campaign looked healthier. One label could die while the underlying discipline kept moving through castings, agencies, sample sizes, and camera angles. Race and class determine who gets to be seen as beautifully broken. That was true in the tuberculosis era, and it stayed true in the age of heroin chic. The 19th century consumptive ideal centered on upper-class white women. Their frailty could be read as refinement because they already stood inside privilege. Poor people dying of the same disease were not imagined as tragic beauties. They were treated as evidence of urban squalor. The same split appears in drug history. In the 1980s and 1990s, crack use in Black communities was covered and policed as criminal threat. Sensationalized stories about crack babies and violent crackheads helped justify harsh punishment and racialized fear, even though most crack users were white. When white Americans later became the public face of opioid addiction, the tone shifted toward treatment, sympathy, and public health. That contrast sits right beside the fashion trend itself. Fashion was taking the visual markers of addiction and presenting them as edgy, high status, and cool, but only on a narrow set of bodies. A pale young white model could wear depletion as style. Poor users, especially Black users, did not receive that reading. They received surveillance and punishment. The phrase "glamorizing pain" can stay too vague unless it gets pinned down. Culture does not glamorize all pain equally. It selects pain that can be made legible as beauty without disturbing the viewer's sense of order. The suffering has to be detached from poverty enough to remain consumable. In elite fashion imagery, exhaustion could read as sophistication because the surrounding signals stayed expensive. Strip that context away, and the same signs become evidence of emergency. Culture reads bodies through framing before it reads them through biology. That framing carries real consequences. Sympathy and punishment do not arrive evenly. When a beauty standard borrows the look of crisis, It also borrows from people living inside actual crisis, then redistributes the meaning. The cycle did not end when the trend dropped out of fashion. It reappeared under different names. In the 2000s, fashion and celebrity culture leaned toward a healthier look than the most explicit 1990s drug-coated imagery, yet thinness never lost its status. Some magazines would reject shoots if models looked too ill, yet the preferred body remained extremely slim. The language softened. The demand stayed narrow. The 2010s then produced overlapping reactions. Wellness culture exploded. So did body positivity. On paper, those trends looked opposed. In practice, both were quickly monetized. The clean girl and wellness aesthetics sold discipline, glowing skin, minimal makeup, expensive routines, and bodies that looked controlled rather than depleted. Wellness promised health, but it also sold another restricted script for femininity: organized, polished, toned, and purchasable. Body positivity came from activism that challenged beauty hierarchies and demanded space for bodies long excluded from fashion media. Once brands recognized its commercial value, they moved in. Campaigns marketed as body positive still favored a narrow subset of bodies, often white, hourglass-shaped, and only modestly larger than the old norm. The movement's language was absorbed faster than its politics. The usual public argument asks which trend is better: thin, curvy, polished, messy, healthy, sickly. The deeper problem sits elsewhere. Fashion does not need one stable ideal. It benefits from instability. A constantly moving target keeps consumers anxious, attentive, and available for the next correction. That correction never arrives alone. It comes with supplements, shapewear, classes, surgery, skincare, medication, meal plans, and media narratives about personal transformation. Even resistance can be monetized. A rejection of polish becomes a product line for looking undone in the correct way. A rebellion against thinness becomes a campaign that still sells aspiration. So when that older mood began creeping back through trend reports, it did not return exactly as it had looked in 1993. Celebrity culture kept that instability alive. Tabloids, paparazzi photography, and gossip media turned women's bodies into rolling public referendums. A star could be praised one month for visible thinness, then criticized the next for looking too frail, then praised again for a healthy recovery that still fit a narrow frame. The message kept shifting, yet the surveillance never let up. That environment trained audiences to treat the female body as a project under continuous review. Fashion magazines, gossip blogs, red carpet commentary, and later social media all fed the same feedback loop. Beauty stopped looking like a stable aspiration and started looking like an endless correction cycle with no natural endpoint. Today's version is less literal and, in some ways, more diffuse. The current mix includes indie sleaze revivals, sad girl imagery, and the darker high fashion look sometimes described as succubus chic. Current rebellion trends are often framed as a move away from the polished, clean girl image and toward a rougher, intentionally unkempt mood. Online aesthetic guides describe succubus chic in language that openly echoes heroin chic: extremely thin, pale, angular, dark-eyed, high fashion, and expensive to maintain. The maintenance piece is especially important. This is not anti-consumer rebellion. It often relies on money. Buccal fat removal, intense contouring, weight loss drugs, designer styling, and professional image management all feed the effect. The look imitates ruin while requiring resources. The sad girl side of the cycle works differently, but it runs on the same engine. That aesthetic beautifies suffering and trivializes depression by turning isolation, sadness, and disordered vulnerability into a recognizable visual brand. The platform economy rewards that brand. Pale filters, tired eyes, dissociative expressions, captions about numbness, references to medication, loneliness, or emotional collapse. None of this needs to name a drug directly to preserve the old association between feminine beauty and visible unwellness. The atmosphere is broader now. In the 1990s, the reference point was specifically narcotic. In the 2020s, the reference point is generalized distress, depression, dissociation, Disordered eating and medication culture blur together into a sellable mood. That makes the trend easier to spread. It can attach to music, makeup, fashion, and social media behavior all at once. That earlier trend at least named a drug and therefore named a danger. The newer aesthetics often hide inside broader terms: moody, messy, raw, ethereal, detached. Those labels sound less alarming, which gives the imagery more room to circulate before anyone asks what exactly is being normalized. The online environment also creates constant rehearsal. In the magazine era, a reader might encounter a few dominant images each month. Now, the same visual cues appear across beauty tutorials, mood boards, celebrity slideshows, fan edits, trend explainers, shopping links, and short-form videos. Repetition turns a niche mood into common sense. The social media version also changes who performs the look. In the 1990s, the dominant images came from magazines and campaigns controlled by editors, advertisers, and photographers. Now, ordinary users reproduce the mood themselves, often with filters, captions, and styling choices that mimic editorial language. That can make the trend feel more democratic, as though it rose from below rather than being handed down from above. Yet platforms still reward the same narrow signals. The posts that travel furthest tend to be the ones that make distress look coherent, attractive, and easy to recognize at a glance. The algorithm does not need to understand suffering in any human sense. It only needs to detect what holds attention. This is where capitalism and patriarchy stop being abstract words and start describing a visible process. Beauty standards do not simply reflect desire, they organize it. They tell women which version of the body currently reads as disciplined, desirable, modern, or worthy of attention. Then they attach products, routines, and status to that version. That aesthetic made deterioration fashionable during a decade when media industries were exceptionally good at turning alienation into style. Wellness sold self-optimization during a decade obsessed with personal branding. Body positivity was folded into campaigns as soon as it showed market strength. The current return of drained, detached femininity is already being packaged through luxury fashion, cosmetic procedures, and algorithmic recommendation. The system does not care whether the body ideal is called healthy or unhealthy. It cares whether the ideal can be circulated, chased, and sold. That is why the old tuberculosis image still sits so close to the present. It shows the long baseline. Culture has had centuries to rehearse the link between female beauty and a body that appears thinned, weakened, fragile, or close to collapse. The 1990s trend did not invent that link. It modernized it for a commercial image economy. Social media has now accelerated it beyond anything magazines could do on their own. That acceleration helps explain why the cycle feels so hard to break. Each return arrives with enough novelty to look fresh. A new face, a new app, a new label, a new justification. Underneath the surface, the same bargain keeps being offered. Here is pain, cleaned up just enough to be desirable. Here is inequality, translated into style. Here is a body under pressure, presented as aspiration. One reason repetition keeps winning is that beauty culture rarely presents a demand as a demand. It presents it as taste. Trends arrive looking optional, playful, expressive. The coercion sits underneath that tone. Nobody has to follow the look, yet social reward clusters around those who can perform it best. Magazine covers, ad campaigns, celebrity coverage, and algorithmic feeds do not force identical behavior, but they do create a visible hierarchy. Some faces are lifted, some bodies are framed as current, others fall out of focus. That sorting process is how pressure travels without needing to announce itself. The result is a strange split between language and experience. Public rhetoric says beauty is becoming more inclusive, more personal, and more open. Market behavior keeps producing narrow ideals with new branding. Even when the imagery grows darker or rougher, the selection remains disciplined. The face must still read well in a photograph. The body must still conform to a limited range. The sadness must remain aesthetically legible. That last point is easy to miss. Real suffering is chaotic. it distorts the body in ways that are not stylish, photogenic, or coherent. An aesthetic of suffering can only work once the suffering has been edited. That edit is where commerce enters. It cuts away what would repel, flatten, or interrupt desire, then leaves behind just enough damage to create intrigue. That is true of tuberculosis romance, true of the 1990s aesthetic, and true of current online trends that sell detachment as atmosphere. Patriarchy enters here through more than taste. Beauty standards train women to monitor themselves from the outside, to imagine how the face reads, how the body scans, and how mood can be made legible in a flattering way. Capitalism then monetizes that self-monitoring by offering endless fixes and upgrades. The result is a culture in which many women are encouraged to live partly as observers of their own bodies. A trend like this one, or any of its descendants, works especially well inside that arrangement because it turns even depletion into a performance with market value. Distress does not interrupt the beauty economy. It can be folded into it, softened, branded, and sold back as a look. It also explains why each return feels both familiar and newly dangerous. The industry does not need to repeat the past word for word. It only needs to preserve the emotional equation: frailty as depth, restraint as beauty, visible strain as proof that the body is taking the moment seriously. The easiest way to misunderstand Heroin Chic is to treat it as a closed chapter. That reading keeps the damage in the past, inside one scandalous decade, attached to a few famous images and a handful of names. It lets fashion history file the whole thing under controversy and move on. The record does not support that comfort. The harder reading asks you to see continuity where culture prefers novelty: the consumptive woman, the 1990s waif, the ultra-thin celebrity, the clean girl, the sad girl, and the surgically hollowed face, now sold as dark glamour, are not identical images, but they belong to the same long argument about what women should look like when power has shaped desire to its own advantage. Once that pattern comes into view, the question changes. It stops being whether one trend has replaced another. It becomes whether the system producing the trends has changed at all. So far, the answer is painfully plain. It has not.